Tēnei tamihi kia koutou, ko tau mai nei I tēnei rā, na mihi mahana kia koutou. Kia ora everyone, and welcome along to the first of the concurrent sessions for this afternoon. We're conscious of time, so we're going to get started. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to two of my colleagues from Sport New Zealand, Fran, McEwen and Creagh from the Active Rec team, who are going to be talking to you this afternoon about peer crowds and physical activity, who hangs out with who and why. A very interesting topic, I must say, so you've chosen wisely for your first session of the afternoon. I'm going to hand it over to Fran and Ella now. Could you please put your hands together and give them a warm welcome?
Kia ora, ko Fran McEwen tōku ingoa. I'm Fran and I work in the Active Recreation team at Sport New Zealand. I guess to start us off, I'd say that I'm a lifelong youth worker. So my biggest passion in life is working with young people. And I've done that through local government and through running my own charity, which was called the Shift Foundation, working with teenage girls. I'm also currently completing my Masters in Social Work, and I've just been on placement with Oranga Tamariki in the youth justice space for the last 5 months, so working with young people who have offended. And I'm about to go into another youth development organisation in Porirua, working with young people and whānau through secondary schools and transitioning out of Oranga Tamariki care into adulthood. So I'm really interested in young people and really passionate about them. And I've also always been interested in this idea of, I used to look at groups of young women and call them clusters. You'd see them like moving around and you'd be like, oh, look at those clusters of young women, and they'd be wearing different, clothes or doing different things. And I've always been interested in that. And so when this kind of research came up around peer crowds and like who hangs out with whom, I was like, this is a really interesting way to think about young people. So we're just going to share some of our thoughts and things that we've learned. We're not the experts. I'm definitely not. I'm an old person. Luckily, I have got a young person with me who's going to do most of the talking. But I'll let Ella introduce herself and then we'll kick off.
Thanks, Fran. Kia ora koutou, ko Ella Creagh tōku ingoa, he Active Recreation Consultant aho o Ihi Aotearoa Sport New Zealand. So my name is Ella, and I'm also part of the Active Recreation team with Fran, Chloe and Simon as well at Sport New Zealand. I'm also finishing my master's degree in health psychology, some of which we'll be chatting about today, not my master's in particular, but some kind of psychological principles that kind of underlie why people hang out with each other and how that might influence our understanding of physical activity and other behaviours. But more broadly, I'm really interested in young people and centering their voices in research, but in just kind of all physical activity kaupapa. My master's was working with a youth group in the Wairarapa, with Nuka Ora as well, who I know some of you are here today. Working with them to figure out what's important to them and then look at how that might intersect or overlap with physical activity. So a kaupapa close to my heart, and really looking forward to sharing it with you all today as well. So kia ora.
So I don't think I need to labour this bit of information because I think you all know that the Sport New Zealand strategy, the last strategy and this strategy, has a focus on tamariki e rangatahi, and it's evidence-based as to why we want to reduce the decline in physical activity for young people, and not just reduce the decline but make sure that the experiences that they're having in physical activity, whether that's sport or recreation, is quality, and quality looks like lots of different things. But if we really understand young people, who they are, what they're passionate about, then we're more likely to deliver an experience that meets their needs or that feels like quality for them. So that's why we've sort of delved into this peer crowds research as well. So in our 45 minutes, which we've probably only got like 37 minutes left, we're going to cover what is peer crowds, why are they important, how we can apply this to our thinking, and then hopefully have sort of 10 minutes left at the end for you to ask any questions or make any suggestions, because we're not the experts. We've just done a little bit of research into a new sort of methodology to Aotearoa New Zealand, and we're just sharing that sort of idea with you. So we're really interested in your feedback and your questions as well. So I didn't say in my little introduction, but I've been at Sport New Zealand for 7.5 years, which feels like a lifetime. And obviously that's why I've gone off and decided to do a master's and like branch into another area. Maybe I'm like these young people that are going to have 6 careers in my lifetime. But I have been at Sport New Zealand for 7.5 years, and I started when I came into the job in the, it was the young people strategy role was my job. And when I went to the interview, Roger Wood, who's at the front, he actually interviewed me for my job. He's been around for longer than 7.5 years. He said, he sort of started talking about young people, but then maybe mentioned primary school. And I was like, oh, does Sport New Zealand mean children and young people? Do they not just mean young people? And so there was this language that we used to use in the community sports strategy when I first started, where we just lumped kind of all children and young people into this big idea of young people. And so that's when I started at Sport New Zealand, that was how we talked about children and young people. And then as we moved into the last strategy, which is when we started the active recreation team, so moving away from just thinking about young people participating in sport, but thinking about young people participating in other ways. So that might be trampoline, skateboarding, yoga, going to the gym. So just that broad array of movement. We also moved to talking about tamariki and rangatahi, so that transition into thinking that children's needs are going to be very different to young people's needs. And so I guess this kind of, even this peer crowds thinking is an evolution of us. Instead of going all rangatahi, we're starting to go, so rangatahi, yes, there's age and there's gender and there's other demographics like socioeconomic background, but there's also this idea that they hang out with their peers and that their peers have different sort of values and interests. And so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit more now.
All right, so I'm about to have a bit of a korero about what peer crowds actually are. For some of you, it might be an unfamiliar term, but I actually think a lot of you will be really familiar with the concept of peer crowds. So firstly, we're going to do a little activity, and I know we've already seen a very similar question to this morning, but while I flick between screens, if you could just grab out your phones and get ready to scan a QR code. See, not all young people are good at technology, myself included. It's the duplicate one.
There you go, you got it.
There we go. So just casting your mind back to when you were 16 and thinking about what was important to you. You can answer more than once as well. Not surprised to see sport up there, considering we're at a sport conference. Cool, so it's really interesting to see everyone's responses popping up here. So the bigger the term, the more people have contributed or said the same thing. So we're starting to notice a few trends in what was important to young people. We've got sport, friends, fitting in. These are really common things that are important to lots of young people. You guys, when you were young people today as well. Can see future job. We heard about that this morning, how important jobs are for young people in the future. We've got music, fashion, sneakers.
We've got discos.
Discos? Yeah.
And I think I saw Oasis, which I guess is then you start looking at, there's some general things that are really similar, but there's also some things that show people's, I guess, generations as well.
Cool. So now I just want you to look at the things up here, particularly at the one that you contributed, or the ones that you contributed, and raise your hands if that thing in some way influenced what you did, so your behaviour when you were 16. Anyone? Yeah. Cool. So pretty common across the room, but this concept that what's important to us, what we value, what we care about, influences what we do. This is really what underlies peer crowds. So we'll start talking a little bit more about what peer crowds are at a surface level, but this concept is kind of this underlying thing that is consistent across generations, across time, across space, that we can kind of rely on and use to help us understand new generations as they arise. So bear with me again while I change the screens and we'll get back to the presentation. Awesome. So what we were just talking about in terms of values or things that you think are important influencing your behaviour, this is actually what underlies behaviour change. And earlier I mentioned that I'm studying health psychology, and I guess this is kind of a psychological principle that underlies what people do. So the principle kind of is that our values influence our peers, or who we choose to hang out with, and our peers also influence our values. And together, both our values and our peers influence what we do or how we behave, one of which can be physical activity, but this also includes all of the other things that people like to spend their time doing. So peer crowds, they're macro-level connections between peer groups who have similar interests, lifestyles, influences, and habits shared across geographic areas. So a peer group might share values, but this is a micro-level connection that's dependent on interactions or time spent together. So for example, if we went to visit a peer group, a high school in Auckland, we might see a peer group there. And then if we went to a high school in Wellington, we might see a really similar group of young people there as well. And while these two groups of people may never have met each other in real life, they would be considered the same peer crowd because the underlying values that drive what they do are the same. So I've talked a lot about peer crowds to a few people now, and one time someone from the research team said to me, whenever I hear you talk about peer crowds, all I can think of is The Breakfast Club. So hands up if you're familiar with this movie. Beautiful. So we have, from left to right, we have John the bad boy, also known as the rebellious delinquent. We have Andrew the jock, Alison the withdrawn loner, which I think is a bit of a sad name to give Alison, but we also have Claire the popular princess and Brian the awkward academic. So I guess the point is that these characters at some level, or at a very basic level, represent the different peer crowds that we see. And the concept of peer crowds, or the understanding of it, has been around for a long time. And what we're doing at Sport New Zealand is just diving into the nuance of this and considering how young people see these peer crowds from their own perspective as well. So peer crowds is not a new idea, and it's not a Sport New Zealand idea. Peer crowds have been researched before, but in the context of risk behaviour and changing risk behaviour, particularly among teenagers. So this type of work is also known as segmentation, or can be known as creating personas as well. And it's quite a common marketing technique and is often not sector or public facing. So this research, peer crowds research, was kind of invented by a group called Rescue Agency in America. And then it was brought to Aotearoa in 2016 when Rescue collaborated with the New Zealand Drug Foundation to explore how peer crowds might influence kind of risk behaviour campaigns to reduce risk and harm in young people. So the image that you can see up here is a very old image of the original peer crowds research of some of the different peer crowds that they found. And you might start to recognise some similarities between these groups and the Breakfast Club that we just saw, but perhaps even your own high school experiences as well. And I guess if the image makes you feel a bit uncomfortable in any way, maybe with the terms used or the way the young people are presented, That's a good thing to realise, because the real reason that we did this research is that the peer crowds they found in 2016 don't necessarily reflect the peer crowds in Aotearoa today. And we needed to better understand how young people, the young people of today, understand themselves. So now we're going to watch two different videos, which were both inspired by the peer crowds research done by Rescue Agency in America. Both videos are campaign videos to reduce the use of tobacco amongst young people. And I just want you to watch the videos and see if you can notice any differences between them.
Be tobacco-free and in control, so you can rise and grind every day.
Fresh Empire. Keep it fresh. Live tobacco-free.
And then this is the second video.
My family has a deep legacy around here, and we look out for each other. My folks and their relatives, my aunt and the little ones, even grandma down the way. We got each other's backs. Even when it comes to my little brother, he's really something, but he's one of the reasons I live tobacco-free. Because if I use tobacco, my little brother is more likely to use it too, and that can cause him cancer down the line. I can't be the reason he does that. So for my family, I live tobacco-free.
Go to downanddirtylife.com/lookingout.
Cool. So, did anyone notice any differences? Yeah. Yeah. So, I'll just go to the next slide. Yeah, so I guess with those two videos, you can really clearly see that they're targeting different groups of young people. Different music, different clothing, different values that are coming through with the country peer crowd, which was the last video. We saw that strong sense of family connection and kind of that intergenerational relationships. Whereas with the first video, which was kind of targeting more of a hip-hop peer crowd in America, that was kind of more about that hustle, those friendship connections as well. So really different campaigns, but both had a really big impact, and you can see that up on the slide here. So this is just a comparison from 2014 to 2015, so looking at the before and after of when the campaign ran, and I think this is for the country peer crowd or the Down and Dirty video that we watched. And you can see, you know, in one state, so Virginia, while we expect e-cigarettes or vapes to be on the rise, you can see that the use of any tobacco, cigarettes and chewing all decreased, which is pretty impressive just in 1 year of a campaign running. So I guess this concept of peer crowds has been used and has been really effective in other spaces, but to our knowledge, peer crowds has never been applied to physical activity, to understanding physical activity in young people. So this is why we wanted to do this research. This is why it's really exciting, but it also means that we don't know what the outcomes will be. So we're going to introduce the peer crowds, but in terms of how this connects to physical activity and what this means for you, that's something we'll be discussing, and we'll be kind of keeping you up to date as we find out in real time as well. So for the research, we did this at the start of last year. We did interviews and focus groups with 88 teenagers and 63 young adults. And while this seems like a small sample size, it was qualitative research. So what that means is that when you start hearing the same things from your participants, that's kind of when you know you've reached a good sample size, and that's exactly what we had with this sample here. So you can kind of see a little flow chart or timeline, of the research process. So firstly, the young people did a survey where they answered some value statements, and they also had to, out of a selection of maybe like 60 photos of young people, they had to choose the 3 people they were most likely to hang out with and the 3 people they were least likely to hang out with. And this just gave us an indication of which peer crowd they might be sitting in. They then did a photo sort activity where they sorted 120 to 150 photos of real young people from Aotearoa into 10 different categories. And they did this based on the question, who do you think would hang out with who? And while this might sound easy, it's actually a really hard task to do. So huge mihi to all of the young people that took part in this research as well. We as the research team then asked them some questions about the photo sort. So we asked them, why would these people hang out? What do they do in their weekends? What do they care about? What sports do they play? What sports do they not play? Just to get that deeper understanding of the peer crowd itself. And then crucially, the last step was that we asked the young people to tell us about which peer crowd or peer crowds they thought they fit best into. And I guess this was really important because it gave us that insider perspective. So some peer crowds can be perceived maybe a bit stereotypically by those not in the peer crowd. So it's really important to get the real honest voices of those who identify with that peer crowd. And like I said before, this part that we're talking about today is just the very first phase of the research. So firstly, we needed to understand which peer crowds currently exist in Aotearoa. The next phase that's currently happening now is incorporating peer crowds into the Active NZ survey to get some data on the size of the peer crowd and where different peer crowds might be participating in different physical activities. And then phase 3 will be sharing these insights back with the sector, back with you guys, so that it can inform your work and our work at Sport New Zealand as well. Cool. So we're now going to take a look at the peer crowds that we found from the research, which is the exciting part. And yeah, I'm going to go through the teenage peer crowds one by one, and then I'll show all of the young adult peer crowds at the end. And then we'll have a bit of a korero about what we see as well. So the first peer crowd is the popular peer crowd. And down the side we have a few different categories. So we have the terms used. These terms were real words that young people used to describe this peer crowd. The perceived to is kind of like a value statement that the research team created based on what the young people told us. And the popular peer crowd also had a subgroup, which is a group that fits within the overall peer crowd of popular, but is slightly distinct as well. The illustrations you can see up there just give you a little bit of a visual representation of what that peer crowd might look like, but it's really hard, if not impossible, to depict the visual variation of a peer crowd in 4 images. So just to give you a little bit of an indication of what that peer crowd might look like. So the terms used for popular are popular, party, sporty, outgoing, social media, fashionable, rich, attractive and influencers. They're perceived to place strong value on social perception and appearance. And the subgroup for popular are the sporty all-rounders who engage in traditional team sports like rugby, netball or basketball. We then have the mainstream peer crowd. So the terms used are nice, happy, comfy, successful, quiet, studious, supportive. They're perceived to place strong value on positive behaviours and academic success. And they like to engage in activities such as family barbecues, racket sports and gaming, which can be online and board games. We then have the roots and resilience peer crowd, who were described as chill, funny, vibes, confident, struggles, culture, family and friends. They're perceived to place a strong value on their family and community, and they enjoy playing sport and socialising in small friendship groups, and their friends were often seen as their family, so really tight-knit friendship groups. The alternative peer crowd, so the terms used are LGBTQIA+, grunge, indie, skaters, creative, woke, festivals, activism, bands, and rock music. They're perceived to place strong value on creative expression, and they're interested in social justice causes, music and the arts, including visual arts, theatre, and dance. And then finally for the teens, we have the rural peer crowd, which was actually a new peer crowd for the teenagers in the context of Aotearoa. And the terms used were outdoors, rural, mullet, farmers, practical, and adventure. And this just shows the importance of using the actual words that young people use. You know, if mullet's the word, then mullet's the word. And they're perceived to place strong value on a rural lifestyle, including the outdoors and close community. And they engage in activities such as agriculture and hunting, fishing, horse riding, and motocross. So these are our teen peer crowds. We also have the young adult peer crowds. So you can see that some of the peer crowds are the same. Roots and resilience, mainstream, alternative are all the same as for the teens. The partier peer crowd for the young adults is like an older version of the popular peer crowd a little bit. And then we also have tradies, young professional, and outdoorsy. And what I find really interesting about the young adult peer crowds is that not only is there more of them, they also have a stronger association with profession. And I think this is really interesting because it kind of shows that as young people leave high school, make their way in the world, start to have a bit more choice about where they're going and what they're doing, the peer crowds also start to show that diversity in pathways as well. So if you are anyone in this room working with people 18 to 25 years old, just something really interesting to bear in mind with those peer crowds there as well. So just a couple of changes in peer crowds that we noticed from 2016 to 2024. So some peer crowds are shifting. The young professionals have become less corporate and kind of more about tech and creativity, startup companies as well. The term hip hop, as we saw earlier in that American kind of first peer crowds, that's not really a relevant term in Aotearoa anymore. And alternative, this peer crowd has a stronger focus on social justice causes and allyship with the rainbow community as well. We also have new peer crowds emerging, so rural, tradies, and outdoorsy weren't found in 2016, and we're aiming to validate these through the Active NZ survey. Language has changed, so in 2016 terms like emo and hipster were used, but we didn't really see this with the young people in 2024. And we also noticed that language varies regionally. So when we talked to people in Wellington who were part of the alternative peer crowd, they talked about Newtown as in living in Newtown or hanging out in Newtown. If you know the suburb of Newtown in Wellington, you might pick up on that vibe there. But we also noticed this in Auckland as well, with different peer crowds being associated with different high schools. So really interesting to kind of think about how you could apply this locally in your own context as well. And preferences and behaviours have changed. So when this research was done in 2016, TikTok didn't even exist. And we definitely saw TikTok being a very popular choice for social media use with the young people who participated in this research. And also just noting the impact that influencers, social media influencers have on young people's behaviours as well. Cool, so I'm going to stop talking now, and you guys are going to have a little korero with the person next to you or your table, just about which peer crowds that you might notice in your physical activity, so your sport or activity, and which peer crowds you might not notice as well. So we've got the teen ones up here if you want to refer back to them, but if your context is working with young adults, feel free to chat about that as well. So yeah, we'll just spend a couple minutes on that and then we'll get back into it. Thanks.
Oh, the next one is when you think about diversity.
Oh yeah, that takes 2 seconds.
But yeah, they are some fun when you look at like who's in the room.
Yeah, some people are definitely engaged and other people you look at them and they kind of just,
Like not.
yeah. Roger's falling asleep.
That's
He
not.
was.
Oh yeah, that's normal.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's actually normal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure it is. They give him a shout out at the end. Is there anything else we need to say? No,
We don't want them to share back on the same.
Nah, I think we just move on.
Right, that's your 2 minutes. Sorry to interrupt you. Oh, but I like that you actually all want to talk to each other. That's lovely. Okay, so we've only got a few more slides to get through, and then you're allowed a little coffee break before you go to your next section. Roger Wood. Roger Wood.
Cool. So hopefully you had some good discussion with your tables there, and hopefully that discussion can continue into the rest of the conference. But just before I hand over to Fran, I guess previously when you thought about diversity, you might have thought these two people represented diversity. But actually, as we've just seen, these two young people are from the same peer crowd. So maybe this is a better representation of what diversity can look like amongst young people. And just want to really encourage you guys to think about how you might see peer crowds in your work, or how you could support peer crowds going forward as well.
So hopefully I don't even need to answer this question. You can maybe see some relevance as to like what we're getting at or why we might be talking about this, but just in case you haven't, I'll spell it out for you. Why is this important? Obviously we're all in the game of caring deeply about children and young people being active, probably because we've all had that amazing benefit of engaging in something that really supported our own health and well-being as a young person, or maybe we have tamariki and we know the benefits of movement and how good it is. I mean, humans were born to move, right? And we've become more and more sedentary, and it's getting harder and harder. So we all care about children and young people moving in a way that works for them. And so thinking about how diverse they are and how different they are and what they're interested in helps us think about how we're going to make sure our physical activity meets the needs of diverse young people. And I think we're probably sort of hearing a little bit more and more about this, and our team coming from the recreation space loves sport, particularly golf and cricket. Weirdly, those are my two sports that I really enjoy watching, but I'm also really passionate about getting out and tramping and being out in nature, trail running, that sort of thing. And I think we're seeing this sort of shift towards some young people moving from maybe playing traditional sport, especially as they get into that those older sort of peer crowds into the young adult space, getting more into the gym. And so this is just examples of stuff we saw during sort of COVID. Like if there is a demand, then we need to be shifting the way we offer our activity to meet the needs of young people in order to keep them active. Doesn't really matter at the end of the day what they're doing, we just want them to be moving in a way that works for them. So I think Ella's going to finish us off with just how can maybe we spark some thinking in your mind about how this could be used in practice.
So we kind of see there being two main ways that peer crowds could impact your thinking and your action. So firstly, you might want a greater diversity of young people to be participating in your sport or activity, in which case you could use peer crowds insights to make sure that you're appealing to all of the peer crowds. Alternatively, you might just want to focus on one peer crowd in particular, in which case you would apply the peer crowd's insights to make your program or initiative really specific and really well tailored to that peer crowd. So not the only two ways that you can use peer crowds, but just kind of trying to help you think about how this might be relevant for your work as well. So on that note, we might have a 1-minute discussion about how you think you could apply peer crowds in your mahi. But I guess just before we get into that, this quote from Henry Ford, which Fran reminded me of, is if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. So to get something different, we have to take a different path. So how might peer crowds help you take that different path as well? So we'll have like 1 minute chatting with your table, and then we'll come back to wrap up the session. Yeah, there's only one more slide. All right, in the essence of time, we're just going to have to wrap up that discussion there, sorry. But yeah, I was just having a chat with Fran, and I guess we don't have time to hear your thoughts now, but because this is a new project, a new idea, and we don't know what it's going to lead to or what the insights will be or how it's relevant to you guys, we're really keen to hear what you've been discussing, and if you've got any thoughts or ideas or questions as well about peer crowds and about how this is relevant to your mahi. So just quickly, some final thoughts about peer crowds. We see it as being just the start. And I guess I mentioned one of the sub-peer crowds, the popular peer crowd, the sporty subgroup, of the popular peer crowd. But there are other subgroups for the young adult peer crowds as well. And I guess what this is kind of pointing to is that you can get more layers of nuance, more layers of understanding of the peer crowds if you want to. So you can take them as we've presented them here, but if you really want to understand the peer crowds at a deeper level and the nuance within them as well, that's also possible. And one of the ways you can go about this is through co-design. So the best way to understand young people, to create initiatives and programs that really resonate with them, is by getting them on board in the process as well. And also just a note on intersectionality. So I think peer crowds will be most effective when understood through the lens of intersectionality. So how do young people's peer crowds, alongside their ethnicity, their gender, their sexual orientation, their experiences of disability or neurodiversity, how do those things intersect to influence their behaviour, and how can we be supporting that as well? So just some final thoughts for you to take away too. So that is everything from Fran and I. Thank you so much for your attention, for your engagement. And yeah, just want to say ngā mihi nui to the Rescue Agency, New Zealand Drug Foundation, to Hiringa Waka Victoria University, and all of the schools, organisations and young people involved. Shout out to Creagh as well, who are here today, who were involved in this research too. And if you want to read the report, the QR code is there to scan as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Fran and Ella, for a really informative presentation. I found that really, really interesting and extremely relevant to our sector. I think often we tend to group our participants by demographics like you alluded to earlier, such as age, gender, socio-economic. But I feel like peer crowds provides us with a unique opportunity to look at our participants a little bit differently, understand what really motivates, influences their behaviour, which hopefully can inform our mahi going forward and really design physical activity initiatives, sporting opportunities, sporting participation opportunities that really meet their wants and needs. So thank you very much. We're now going to break for afternoon tea. It's going to be served just out in the main foyer there. After afternoon tea, we've got about 15 minutes, but after afternoon tea, if you could head along straight to your next concurrent session that you've registered for. If you're not sure what that is or where it is, you can find all the details in your event app under My Agenda. But I just want to thank you again for all coming along this afternoon, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Thank you.